of about 800 who went over the top that morning of the Newfoundland Regiment. 68 showed up the following morning. Well, I've always had an interest in history, and my two grandfathers were involved directly in the First World War. I'm a retired teacher, and I felt that my students and other people really didn't have enough of the knowledge about their own particular history, that of Newfoundland, and maybe of their own family. So I thought I might combine the two, and here we are. It's a walkthrough of the First World War, following in the steps of the Newfoundland Regiment. We started in Newfoundland, the Newfoundland that the boys would have quit at the age of 17, 18, 19, 20. So we start with a look back at Newfoundland at the time, which was an independent dominion of the British Empire, which is very important, I think. War was declared not by Newfoundland, even though Newfoundland was an independent dominion. War was declared by Great Britain on behalf of the Empire. So Great Britain declared war for not only Newfoundland, but for New Zealand, Australia, India, Canada, and South Africa. From there, we follow the Newfoundland Regiment to its training grounds in primarily Scotland, in Great Britain, primarily Scotland. And from there to their baptism of fire in Gallipoli, which, as you know, is at the eastern end of the Mediterranean, in Turkey. They were there until January of 1916, at which time they set sail for France, which is probably a better known story by Newfoundlanders. You were in a trench for a number of days, number of weeks, and if you can imagine, the trench was at least shoulder high, and you had to keep your head down, else you wouldn't have it for very long. So even though you were in a foreign country, it might be the most exotic place in the world, which it wasn't, but you never saw it because you never put your head up over the trench. So you saw the walls of the trench, and you saw blue sky, or grey sky, or rain, or whatever was falling at the time, and the rats running around underneath, and that's what you saw for weeks on end. You didn't eat very well. Your feet were always muddy and wet, and you suffered from trench foot, and you had your own little circus of lice with you, and so it wasn't anywhere you would choose to go if you could choose to go. Well, I have a selection of postcards of which I've made a few copies, which are on display. The originals are upstairs. They are from French soldiers convalescing. They are from my mother and her brother, in fact, to their father at the time. There's one from Queen Mary and King George V on Christmas of 1914 to the troops, which is a generic postcard sent to the troops. And there is also one, a curiosity, which is a field postcard, and on it says, it has a list. It's like one of these multiple choice questions. It says, I am in hospital, I am well, I am feeling sick, and then you tick the one that was relevant, you crossed out the rest. And if you didn't do that properly, then your postcard was ripped into pieces and consigned to whatever they consigned ripped up postcards to. At the end of the exhibition, we conclude with a sort of multinational cemetery. Most of these I've left marked to a soldier of the Great War or unknown. There from all over the world. So it really was a world war. A little bit distressing that the world would come together for that sort of event rather than something a little bit more constructive.
I think it's absolutely terrific. Like I say, the research that has gone in that for like I say, months and months, and the total history from where our young men came from, the communities in Newfoundland, right through to the end of the war. It's totally amazing, and we're so happy to be the venue for that.
The war, I suppose, is inevitable. The Second World War was more inevitable than the First, and yet the First World War led to the Second World War. Let me say that for the individual person, it's probably, it can become very much of a tragedy. It can at times be very unnecessary. But in the case of the First World War, which I suppose if I have a specialty because I'm only an amateur historian, it's the pity of it all. It's loss of innocence. I would like to see people take more of an interest in their own family backgrounds, the backgrounds of their own society, their own country, and the world in general, because we live in that world, more and more so. We're part of a very small world. And maybe looking at some of the mistakes that have been made in the past, we can correct some of the mistakes to be made in the future. You know, it would be these young men, 17, 18, and 19, it'd be nice if they could dedicate their lives to something rather than their deaths.